Thank you, Miriam, and so grateful to be here today. I've been not here as frequently as I usually am over the past several weeks because I've been participating in a wonderful IJS cohort called Contemplative Jewish Prayer with Rabbis Nancy Flam and James Jacobson Mazels. And so the practice involved in this cohort study over the past month has been amazing. And I want to share some of the practices and things that I'm learning through that cohort. And I've also missed being here on the daily sit as I've been focused on that practice. So it's interesting, one of the biggest takeaways for me from being a part of the Contemplative Jewish Prayer cohort is how much silence has figured in very, very prominently into the practices and the teachings. And so it was interesting for some people, as I was reading the New York Times today, they had an article on the importance of having noise-free environments or reduced noise environments in our lives. It was a very powerful article, and I was struck by that article in light of what I want to share today about silence. So we're sometimes with Judaism, such a word-filled tradition, we're a little bit surprised that silence can have such a prominent place. Some of us may be familiar with the idea that our sages ask that we wait. And sometimes this word wait, as it can be translated from the Talmud, can be interpreted as meditation, that we actually meditate before we pray. Now, our meditation today may or may not be a prelude to prayer, but there's no doubt that our silence has the capacity to be transformative for us and for the world. And maybe for some of us, that's why we came to join this community today. Maybe some of us look forward to it. That's why we're here. Or some of us may continue to be challenged by it. The idea of trying to be silent and carve out space for that in our day. And that's why we're here. Wherever we are, there is a certain irony for me in talking about silence. I'm mindful of that, and yet aware that we come from this word-filled tradition. And so even in preparing for today, I asked myself, will I have enough to say about silence? And then I felt this chuckle coming over me. So please know that Kat will share a link to the sources that I'm going to share today. She'll share it later on. So I invite you to just enter into this teaching with your heart at the moment and know that if you're curious about these sources I'm sharing from Rabbis Nancy Flam and James Jacobson Mazels, that they'll be coming to you in the chat later on. In the first collection of rabbinic literature known as the Mishnah, dating back to the 2nd century, we read that Shimon would say, "All my days I've been raised among the sages, and I have found nothing better for the body than silence. Nothing better for our bodies than to just take a break from words." Silence invites us to release the intellect, to set it down for a bit, to give it a rest, to stop problem solving, stop creating stories, fixing things. And silence invites us to turn to the heart. Hannah Rochel Verbermacher, known as the Maiden of Ludmir, was a 19th century Hasidic teacher. And she writes, "Every pure thought that flows from the desires of the heart, the intellect is unable to grasp at all." I just love that idea. Every pure thought that flows from the desires of the thought, the intellect is unable to grasp at all. So what gets in the way of the flow from the heart? In the words of Rumi, it is thought traffic. The intellect gets in the way. in a way that the Buddhists might call monkey mind, right? Such a busy traffic flow of thoughts, the jumping from thing to thing to thing. Our overly active intellect activates, it causes us to feel unsettled, restless, or confused. And it gives voice to our inner critic, which is most connected to our ego. So for our kavanah today, for our intent, for our practice, I want to share another teaching from the rabbis from this course, this IJS course. And it's a Talmudic text taken from the section of the Talmud that focuses on Yom Kippur, but of course has nothing to do with Yom Kippur because of the associative nature of the Talmud, or on the face of it has nothing to do with Yom Kippur. But it names the sounds that get in the way of our silence, and it offers an intriguing image for us to consider today. So the teaching is, if not for the sound of Rome, we would hear the sound of the sun. If not for the sound of Rome, we would hear the sound of the sun. We can imagine that for the rabbis living under Roman rule, the sound of Rome was their form of monkey mind. Can we let go of the sound of Rome to hear something that we see, to listen so closely in silence that we might discern something new and different, or that we might just simply quiet the mind, or that this experience might awaken us, as Rabbi Dov Beyer, the Maggid of Masorich, teaches when he says, all that we see and hear and all the occurrences which happen to us, they all come to awaken us. This is the possibility of silence for us. So I invite you to mindfully take your seat. Perhaps you did at the beginning of this sit, but as we've been absorbing some of these teachings, reminding ourselves to go inward to our bodies, if we're seated, to ground our pelvis on whatever surface we find ourselves, to feel our feet in contact with whatever surface is below that, if we're sitting or standing. And for some who are lying down, to feel the contact of our bodies against the surface, our backs, our shoulders, arms, elbows. And to invite ourselves into a space to listen in silence for something that we might associate with seeing. To enter into that sun, that fiery image in the sky, and to listen closely, to wonder, what is the sound that the sun makes? Can I release Rome? Can I release the monkey mind, the intellect, to enter into a different space? And you may want to play with the image of the warmth of the sun enveloping your body, starting with your head. If this is an image or a sensation that's open to you, to feel that warmth cascading down as we enter this period of silence for the next 12 or 13 minutes together. Lai 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 nai nai yai nai 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 yai nai yai nai nai yai lai 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 yai nai nai yai nai 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 mai nai yai nai nai. If not for the sound of Rome, we would hear the sound of the sun. May this offering of our silence today be acceptable to you, O Divine One, and bring us joy and presence.
Thank you so much, Susan. Beautiful teaching, beautiful practice. Now, at this point, let's turn to the mourner's Kaddish. So, friends, if you're in the period of mourning, if you're marking a yahrzeit, the anniversary of a death, or if you are in the midst of grief of some form, you're invited to unmute and to rise in body and spirit. And I invite the community to join in responding and in loving support. You can put names in the chat of those you're remembering today.
Yet Gadal v'yet Kadash Be'alma Dibra Chirute Yamlish Malchute Be'ev Yechon Yom Echon Chaye Dechol Beit Yisrael Yagalach V'yivru Amen. Hishme Rabbi V'Brach Le'olam U'Lo Me'o Mayam Barach Istabat Yitzhar V'yet Ramam V'yet Nasei V'yet Hadar Elamin Kata Tata Benechamata Beamiran Bealma Bimuru Amen. Ishlaba Ishlama Rabba means Maya B'chaim Aleinu Yalko Yisrael Bimuru Amen. Shalom Bimrama Uyase Shalom Aleinu Yalko Yisrael Yalko Yoshvei Bimuru Amen.
Amen.
You're invited to be seated. May their memories be a blessing in our lives. Thank you, everyone, and may their memories truly be a blessing in your lives. Thank you so much, Susan. And as always, Kat, thank you for holding the text so beautifully. For those who are leaving now, we wish you good health and the blessings of silence, the blessings of an open heart, and look forward to being with you again. And for those who are able to stay, we'll have time for Q&A with Susan. And if you have a question, please put in the chat in bold question, and we'll be able to easily see your questions. So maybe I'll start, Susan, if I may. What a rich exploration and framing of the power and the ways of working with silence. And I was struck that you brought in the image of, well, actually two images that are internal and one that's external. So you brought in the image of silence as good for the body, the best thing for the body, and silence to bring forth what is in the heart. And then you gave us also the image from classical rabbinic sources of silence enabling us to hear the cosmos, to hear the movement of the sun. And maybe I'd love to start off by asking you maybe to share a little bit of your experiences of connecting with silence as something to turn inward, and what you discover within, and what silence helps you discover outside of yourself?
Thank you, Miriam, for highlighting the teachings in that way. So one of the major teachings of this course so far is a word I didn't use yet today, but is a big part of the approach, is surrender. And so silence for me is one important aspect of surrender, of really giving myself over to not having to produce, not having to fix, just giving over to the moment. And so that's one of the major teachings and one of the biggest foci from this particular methodology of meditation that we're exploring. I realize in saying that surrender is a triggering word for some people. It's a word that we don't often associate with our tradition. I encourage you to take this class if you feel this way, because it really does open up this word in a way that really is deeply grounded in Jewish tradition. In terms of the external, the image of the sun, I was just, as I mentioned earlier, so struck by this article that appeared in the New York Times today. And I literally opened it and thought, oh my gosh, this is really what I'm teaching about. This article in particular talked about the stressors on our bodies from an overload of sound. And also reflecting on what a luxury it is, given external sources, to actually be able to foster silence, right? And for some people, in the very places which they live, without aids such as earplugs or other things, they actually don't have that. They don't have that luxury. And so that also attuned me to a higher level of gratitude, like what it means to elect into silence as a spiritual practice, which can be difficult to commit to, but it's actually a huge privilege. And I'll just say in closing this, that I began to, as I was picturing the sun, as meditating, I was beginning to be extra aware of my exhalation and kind of almost wondering, like, I don't know, I just really heard my exhalation more and wondering if that effect, like, was there any effect on the sun from my breath? Either the interruption of what I might hear, or almost like blowing out a candle, which sounds kind of fanciful and utterly ridiculous, of course. But it kind of attuned me to a playfulness, I guess, around like this external stimuli of the sun. Took me into a different place today than what I've experienced before.
Beautiful. I'm struck. You touched on gratitude right now. And I'm sitting in Toronto under a skylight and it's pouring. It's been raining all day. And so I sat in that meditation that you guided us into with the sound of the rain falling. And Toronto's been a place that was quite severely affected by the smoke from the wildfires. And as I was sitting, listening to the sound of the rain, I felt such a wave of gratitude for the cleansing capacity of the rain, for the rain nourishing the earth. And that settled right into my body. So thank you so much for that interrelationship. I want to share one thing that Sherry wrote was as she smiled to herself, because as she went into the silence, the words in Sherry's mind emerged so much. And this is a very common practice in meditation, that when we silence the external stimuli, that we actually notice there's a lot of noise inside. And I wonder if you would talk a bit about working with that, and as what you also mentioned, obstacles that arise from ego, so what is it that we navigate when we quiet the outside, and how do we get what is the creation or the discovery of quiet inside?
I keep going back to Rabbi Nancy Flam's teaching, which I've shared here in a sit on occasion: nothing to get and nothing to get rid of. So no matter what our imagery is, that we choose to use during meditation or not, I think that's a helpful backdrop, right? Is that to not approach our meditation as it's going to get me somewhere, and also that it's going to get rid of things. So as an example for that, when I became more aware of my exhalation with the sun, like, thinking, what effect does that have on this, right? Because I'm supposed to be thinking about, or, sensing silence, right? Instead of going into a place of chastisement, I went into a place of kind of chuckling or laughter, right? Like, what a fanciful idea that my exhalation could have any kind of effect on this major ball of fire in the sky, right? And so I think it's not to rid ourselves of what comes and goes, but to see it and to watch it, and to take a light touch to it if we can. Mary, I'm not sure that answered what you're asking, but those are some.
Beautiful. I mean, I sort of threw in too many different ideas at once, but shining a light, sort of an auditory light, maybe is such a gorgeous image that there's use the image of the sound, how loud the sound of Rome is. There's also an internal Rome that is, when we get quiet, we hear the judgmental voices, the thoughts about the past, the planning, and so on. And that's such a helpful image of shining the light on it, because it's always there and buzzing, but we don't notice because we're tuned into so much of the noise outside. And I think you brought forth that sense of not needing to get rid of the internal noise, but then something different happens when we can shine a light on it, listen to it, pay attention to it. And,
one thing that had struck me, and I didn't weave this into the meditation, but the rabbi's relationship with Rome was very complicated. We'll just leave it at that. They were an oppressor. And also the sun was not such a favorable image for the rabbis, right? The moon is the great light of our tradition. It grounds our calendar, the structure of our calendar, in the waxing and the waning of the moon. And so it's interesting to me when I reflect and think about the rabbi's relationship with the sun could be complicated because of how central it was to so many other cultures that oppressed the Jewish people. But actually they lift it up literally as like something that's desirable to listen to. And so I was kind of intrigued by that. I'm not sure what to do with that. I just think there might be a lesson in there that even the things that we want to judge as being not worthwhile or associated with other cultures that aren't desirable or whatever it is, there's something there, right, to be lifted up, to listen to. So wanted to share that too, since it didn't find its way into the teaching today.
That's so valuable. And in saying that, you're also pointing out the sort of cultural overlays that different cultures give to these cosmic, wondrous, absolutely miraculous realities. And I hear what you're pointing to is this sense, what is it like to listen, to be in relationship with these cosmic forces without the projections, without Rome's overlay or, the classical Jewish overlay of the significance of sun or moon, but just to be in its light, in relationship with it. It's lovely. I see a couple questions. One is about the source sheet. So I wonder if Kat, if you can include a link to the source sheet in the chat so people have access to it. And Michael asks about, Michael says, would you please elaborate on the relationship of silence with stillness?
Yeah, I saw that question. It's very profound. And I feel like in this moment, especially given my experience with the practice in the last couple of minutes, that the commitment to go silent, to stop speaking, which I eventually did today, gives us the opportunity to experience stillness. So, and it's interesting. I'm going to go back to the example I gave of the exhale, like the effect of my exhale, right? So my exhale to me was audible. And that's okay, right? It's not silent. I was making a noise with my exhalation, but the commitment to enter into this space and kind of set language and set our intellect as much as we can aside for a moment gives us the opportunity for a quieting practice, right? For a still, like an internal stillness. So that's kind of what's hitting me right now with, in reflection to Michael's question. I enter into a relationship or a commitment to silence to maybe wonder about the effect of stillness on my soul, on my life.
Beautiful. I want to lift up a comment that Rena makes, which is about distinguishing between the freedom to choose silence versus being silenced. And so many have been silenced based on particular identities, based on brave truths that people have been speaking. And this is clearly a very different framing, as you say, of choosing silence and choosing silence as a practice. I'm wondering if there's anything more that you want to say about that dynamic.
Freedom, that freedom is at the core of this as a Jewish value, right? And so when silence or stillness comes from free choice, from a place of freedom, it can be liberating, right? So just to be sure that we're really lifting that up and that people don't equate the commitment to enter into silence and stillness in our practice with any type of repression. In fact, going back to Nancy's teaching of nothing to get, nothing to get rid of, right? That we are in this moment who we are, and what we bring to our practice is not something that should be squelched or repressed in any way.
Beautiful. Well, friends, we need to end here. Susan, thank you so much for your teachings and leading us in practice. And what gratitude to all of you for being together in a community of practice. Many blessings for your day, and we hope to see you again soon.